Welcome to the Bleeding Edge Report with Chris and Tregg, where tech meets its match. Thanks very much, everyone, for showing up today. My name is Tregg Farmer, and with Chris Marshall, and we are the Bleeding Edge Report. And today we have a very, very special guest with us. His name is Jason Wells, and Jason is an AI expert, you might say, who's dealt with AI for many, many years. So welcome to the show, Jason. We appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Tregg, Chris. Great to be on.
Jason works a lot with AI strategy, chat GP development, and he has a new organization that he's working with. It's kind of an AI new venture investing organization, and he's the board member of what's called AI Dev or Development Lab. Who was cited in 2022 as the most promising artificial intelligence provider by CIO Review, which is very good. And you are located on what they call the Silicon Slopes of Utah because of all the ski slopes right above you, right, Jason?
You got ski slopes and a lot of tech, and they tend to work well together.
Yeah, it's amazing, the Salt Lake area. A lot of people don't know it, but it starts back with Novell and WordPerfect and all those companies back in the late 80s, how they started down there. So there's a lot of really, really promising companies, new companies springing down there. So, but we have a couple questions today. Today's program is going to be about artificial intelligence use with applications and new applications and new technology. And our question today, and we want to understand this from Jason, is this AI just hype? Is it vaporware? Is it here to stay? And what kind of applications do we see coming down the road where people are really going to benefit from AI? And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So to start it off with, Jason, I have a couple. The first question is, what do you see as the major business changes that are going to come around from AI? What's really going to change?
That's a good question. So when we talk about what we'll see first is really in the iterative processes and in information. That's like those are the biggest changes, where there's something that is done over and over again. And it's really in the information space. There's AI in robotics. There's AI in computer vision. There's AI in automobiles now. And we are seeing that already. But I think the biggest groundswell is in the information sectors and people working in information. And you're seeing that in content writing. That's an information. That's a content. So that's changing the way people are working and interacting. You're seeing it in, I've spent time in the call center space and in inventory management and computer vision. So these things they're repetitive tasks that deal with information. And now we're seeing that information come in being able to handle images. So there's information in images, and there's information in words, and there's information in numbers. So those are the kind of the three pieces of information, which 10 years ago wasn't too accessible. The words, we were all really in the numbers game, right? If I had numbers, I could use a spreadsheet and I can write a correlation or regression model. Now we've expanded that into information, visual information and written information. That's really where the biggest impact is.
So what would you say is a good example of something that's being worked on right now by companies that takes advantage of that?
So we have to talk about ChatGPT because it's one of the most notable pieces, and it's what has really made people talking about AI. Large human language is complex and difficult, and OpenAI built ChatGPT, but before that, there have been large language models that kind of start off with Stanford and Google with BERT and Robert. So there's a lot of large language models. What it's trying to do is understand written language and to be able to produce or generate. So this generative AI. That has swept really the nation and the world in terms of interact. Like it's the first time people are actually starting to, oh, I'm interacting with AI. And they're seeing that I can ask a question or I can tell it to do something. And that's having a big impact. And I see that and I have people that come and talk to me and they say, I've got to do something. I've got this business and I provide SEO services or marketing services where we write a lot of content for them. And I'm going to lose my job if I don't do something. I'm going to lose my company if I don't do something. So when I've got small business owners and large corporations coming and asking that question, I know it's affecting them right now. They're feeling it, right? So that's where I see it happening. And those are some simple examples, but I could go on and on about, what's happening in that space.
You bring up a good point, and how I would look at what you're talking about is, since Chat GP has come about, it's one of the first times people have been able to visualize what AI can do.
Yeah.
Instead of just read about it or something, they can actually play with it. And now it's become somewhat tangible. And to me, that becoming tangible over the last 4 or 5 months has caused a lot of that hype. It's like, oh, it really is here. Before, it was a lot of discussion. Everything's kind of back behind the curtains. No one sees what the wizard's doing, but now you can see it at work. So.
Yeah, you really can. And in reality, AI is just at its core base, fundamental, foundation is statistics and correlations and trying to understand and learning kind of the way we learn as humans. So if you take computer vision problems, a human can drive a vehicle quite well. And kind of as you came out with the Tesla, that was the first into computer vision where it kind of became mainstream, where people were interacting with AI. But like you said, it's a little more behind the scenes and behind the curtain. You don't really know that. But when a vehicle is operating in any self-driving and it's using images, it's using artificial intelligence to look at an image and say, that's a vehicle, right? That's a dog, this is a person, and it's running that analysis well, not exactly, but very similar to the way a human would. It's looking at those images and it's saying, okay, this is what this is, how should I react to it? So then you build the models on how do I respond to that image and what's happening in my screen. And so we're just seeing that interaction, but there's actually been AI and models that go way back, but we really just haven't been behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. It is kind of interesting. I read where Elon Musk and several months ago kind of ditched LiDAR as a means of helping self-driving cars, and now is putting more and more effort, money, and his resources behind the AI portion of the visualization part of the self-driving. So
yeah, there's a number of debates of what they're doing in China, which is different than the choices and the trade-offs that you have to make are how quickly can you adapt and update the model? How expensive is it to deploy? So all those pieces come into play. But I've seen just to I'm going to pop off a couple of examples of just projects that I've worked on that are interesting. In the computer vision space, for example, I'm working with a client right now who wants to take inventory with a cell phone. And they are basically, they're taking a picture, they've got particular products that they're looking at, and it's recognizing that, classifying it as what that product is, and counting how many it is. Something that manually people were doing, now they could do something where they might spend 5 to 10 hours a week doing in one particular section. Now they can do it in 15 minutes and doing some corrections here and there.
Yeah.
Another use case is we see a lot of writing and understanding of the context. So we have large corporations that have a brand and they care about the brand and they care about the content and the way things are written. So they don't want their users or their employees using a ChatGPT, which has a generic voice. They want to train to write in a particular style. So they take these large language models, and we take those and we build on top of them, fine tuning, so that it can learn the very specific verbiage. How would I say something for this company, for this product, or that product, and become very specific. So it becomes kind of a brand guidance tool while somebody is writing.
That's very interesting. It triggered some thought of mine, because a couple of your examples are talking about, collecting the data, not just producing results from data. And I think that that's very significant because, has been mentioned, earlier, we were talking about who's going to collect the data. And so the machine can actually collect the data, such as in the inventory scenario. I think that's a really good thing. And then in your second case about the style and the brand and the feel and those types of things, I think you really don't want the machine collecting the data at that point. You'd rather have that controlled, and you plug in I guess the AI engine that's going to produce or help the employees produce things quicker. And it's really a productivity play, as opposed to, I guess, just collecting inventory or collecting data, or actually, creating something on its own. Like some of those images that, they've created AI engines that create something that doesn't even exist in nature. That's not going to be, there's no place for that in these two business cases that you're talking about. So I'm interested in those types of scenarios, just in those two cases, kind of point out different ways you can apply these same tools, but they're doing very different things, collecting data versus actually enhancing employee output. But they're not collecting data. Data is actually very, very sensitive and very controlled, right?
Absolutely, it stays there. And what's interesting about this model, and really anyone who's considering AI really needs to think about, what data do I have today? Because data is what trains a model. It trains a machine. Machines are inherently stupid until you feed them information and you teach them what is true. So they learn, and I'm thinking with these models that you've got to gather that information along the way. So I've got data now, but how do I have data in the future? Interestingly enough, two good examples that we've talked about here, Tesla and OpenAI and ChatGPT, both have been criticized with releasing bad products that really weren't that good. And they didn't think out all the things. Well, that is not just a mistake, it's a strategy. And you see it over and over in an AI world, where you're releasing something so that you can get humans to interact with it and gather data and learn from what do they like, what do they not like. But every time you write a query or write a statement, that goes into training the model for ChatGPT. As you drive, as you interact with the environment where you've got cameras that are measuring and tracking all of that, it's learning to drive at the same time. So it is something to consider, is how do I use data in the future? What's my starting point and where do I go? And, in a world where a lot of data is needed, you got to have that strategy for data collection. How do I get the right data?
I'll just make another comment that, along the way, I think we're pretty critical about some of these iterative strategies like you just mentioned. And, people need to understand that you're going to break a few eggs when you're making omelets, right? And my current favorite example of that was recently there was a news out of Samsung where some of the Samsung engineers were using ChatGPT to help them code their operating system. And so in order to do that, they had to put a lot of their Samsung operating system into ChatGPT in order for it to help. And now it's part of the data lake that ChatGPT is using. So it's out of the box, right? In the wild, so to speak, right? So this happens.
It does. Let me touch on that point because it's an interesting one. And I don't want to leave it just at that and explain what is happening because I've been working with OpenAI since 2021. I think in 2021, I started. That's the first time they came out with GPT-3. And prior to that, I was using many other, different other language models, and they really took a leap forward in GPT-3. It was 172 billion token or billion hyperparameters. So one of the largest models at the time. So I was concerned about this point. I was working with various clients and problems on this. And so I reached out to them and said, hey, what's the situation? Are you using this data? And they said, yes, we are. I said, well, I can't have this used, or I can't do this. And they explained that, look, they can firewall the information. And so that with a written letter, and there were hoops that you had to jump through to say this information, it was not going to be included. When ChatGPT came out, all that information is used, and then GPT 3.5, GPT 4, all of that was still what. And when I say used, it's included in their language model, right? So it's just gathered. It's not nefarious. It's just used to learn what language is. But then I saw just about 2 weeks ago that if you're using the API, that none of that data is now included into their model building. If you're using the free ChatGPT interface, that information is included in their database of, in their language models. So just to put that out there, if you're using API, it is not now included in those. And it's why sometimes when we build language models, we'll take a language model where you can take the entirety of it. For example, Google Flan, you can take the entirety of that model and you can build and own your own language model because it's an open source model,
right? And
then build on top of that and host that in your own environment. It's more costly than paying. I'm getting down into some details.
That's perfect. That's perfect. I appreciate it. Tregg, sorry, I just had to dive in with a couple of those questions. Go ahead.
There's no reason to be sorry. I mean, that's what we do here. Ask questions. So you're right on the ball. Yeah. Hey, so let me put together a scenario, and I kind of want to get your opinion on it, your take. So I happen to deal a lot with medical records, because I help a group of doctors with electronic medical record solutions, implementing them and running them and things like that. And I've actually been incredibly curious about the electronic medical record industry since it started in 2008 and kind of what's going on there. So one of the questions that Chris and we always talk about, throw back and forth, is, will it ever come a day when someone could just type in some of their problems and their symptoms and all this other stuff, and then either just spouse back, okay, this is what you have, or it comes up and it says, well, you could have these 5 or 6 things, and hit print, and then take this down to your doctor. In other words, you have medical diagnosis kind of going on through artificial intelligence and using that. Plus, at the same time, with the electronic medical records, you have all the visuals. I mean, there's most of the medical records, everything gets scanned, right? All the X-rays, all the MRIs, everything gets scanned, and then all the treatment plans and everything's already in there. So it's just a massive database. So my question is, have you ever thought about how AI could benefit that industry? And is one of the benefits what Chris and I are really talking about? Just, could it be diagnosis? Could it go that far? What do you think?
So, my opinion, there's no question. That is one of the top use cases for AI. And frankly, I think it'll be very good at it. There is a lot of data, right? There's one of the things that start with, initial diagnosis. You're capturing all the records of what happened, I've got the blood samples, I've got tissue samples, I've got X-rays, I've got these studies. Those are kept in those files. And you have diagnoses, and you have, all the steps that are tracked in there. And I happen to know that in conversation with, it probably was given to me in confidence, so I'll leave out the company name, but it's a very large data network company that is doing exactly that. They have part of their relationship and access with large hospital groups, millions of records, and they're doing exactly that, and starting with, and there's a lot of different ways you can break that out, but starting with a large language model, which is essentially taking the language and the words and starting to build in logic and understanding to be able to do just that, make diagnosis. I believe that that is going to be one of the first things, and the way it's going to come out, or the way it should come out, is an assisted diagnosis. It's a suggestion to the doctor, right? And this is something you have to think about in all AI projects, really, is what is the human interaction? How does the model, the AI and the human interact? And I spent a lot of time thinking about the product, the deployment of AI, not just writing the code. And so you have to think about, how does the human interact with that? If you built that product, you said, here's the diagnosis, you must go forward with it, nobody's going to use that AI because they don't have the confidence in it yet. But if it's a partner with the human, like, hey, here's some information, here's the probability, this is why, these are the things that are popping out. It's like, wow, that's super useful for me, right? That's very helpful. And so those physicians are going to have that as a tool. And as they do that alongside, the machine learns additionally and better. One of the key areas right now, when you think about, there's a language model component to it. On top of that, there's a computer vision component, which, when you think about radiology, is one of the lowest hanging fruits in the medical field, to be able to have a computer that can diagnose or at least identify lesions, tumors, different anomalies. And frankly, because a machine can ingest millions to billions of images, right? And if they're labeled properly, garbage out. So assuming that they were labeled properly and it's accurate, it can learn from all of that, rather than just, as a human, I can only remember so many things, and it's easy to miss something. But again, I see that as a side-to-side relationship. And as we build confidence, we'll build confidence in the AI. Wow, that recommendation's right. I totally agree with it. Or I disagree with it. Well, when you disagree with it, what are you going to do? You're going to make sure you're right. All right. And that's what you want. So I love what can be done there. And again, if you think about it, it's this human AI collaboration. And I think that's the way we need to think about AI, is how do I work together? I'm going to give you another example. My wife is a marketing director. When I talk about AI integration and how it works, she writes content all the time. And I said, so how is it affecting you? Because a lot of people are saying, well, this is going to put me out of work, because it can write. If I say write a LinkedIn post, it'll write a LinkedIn post. If I say write an Instagram post, it'll do that. Write a blog, it'll do that. And she says, and I've talked to several others in the industry, it's like, and they're saying, it's super helpful to get you started, but it really needs my touch still. It still just misses things, and it can't handle these nuances. So again, it becomes this, how do I work with the AI rather than how does it replace me? And we have schools systems that are banning ChatGPT and different language models,
Right.
Because it can write papers. And I think that's a valid point, right? You need to be able to understand, but we also can't ignore the fact that in the future, and the future is now, you need to learn how to interact with that and how to use it as a tool and work together with it. Because I've heard over and over again that now that I use this model or this AI, I can do my job in this amount of time. So for the people that shun AI, they're still doing their job in 8 hours, but the people that are using AI can do their job in 2 hours, just for example. you won't be competitive in the future. And so, like always, you know, I think a good example I read about in farm machines, when farm machines came out, everybody was in a rage about losing jobs. But after all the different farming machines that came out in the 1900s, the number of jobs in farming went up. So now certainly there were certain jobs that were lost, but like what humans do better than anyone else is we adapt. And as long as you allow yourself to adapt, then really you're always going to create value. You do what makes you specifically human and intelligent and emotional and empathetic, right? These are, you know, critical to who we are. So anyways.
So you're kind of describing, you know, like you know, working hand in hand, like an office suite, you know, like an Excel, like a Microsoft Word. You know,
Clippy,
what?
Clippy. You guys remember Clippy from Microsoft? He
No.
does.
Oh, yeah.
Just a little humor there. It was a little animated paper clip that said, "Hey, how can I help you?" Maybe it would
Oh,
actually.
I remember that now. That annoying thing that popped out of nowhere all the time. I couldn't turn that off fast enough. Yeah.
Exactly. Sorry, please continue.
So what it sounds like you're describing is yeah, you are working together with it. It's not doing your job. It's helping you do your job. That whether or not it's going to replace your job, you probably don't have to be. It can help you be more efficient or help bring better information to the table, like what we were talking about in the medical sector. Help that decision making process. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that's key. And frankly, anyone who is developing AI products or wants to have something, or you know, or it gets, you've got to think about that. I have a saying, and I'll tell clients or people I invest in, and I'll say, in the military, they have a saying that is, no good plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Right.
And so I'll tell somebody, look, I'll say no first model survives first contact with a user. And because it's just, how do I do this? It's not as good as I want it to be. I want it to be better. But that's that first contact, which then you adapt the model. As a human, you adapt how you use it. And then you find this really good relationship.
Yeah.
So I'd like to ask Jason a question, because you saw that I was nodding my head quite a bit on the EHR discussion,
Yeah.
and some of the other examples. I'm very bullish as well on AI, and I believe that it's if used properly, it can be a tremendous productivity tool. That's really where I see it with the long lever that we have here. So do you feel, from your perspective, that this could possibly have the same level of productivity gains as we saw in the early 2000s? Remember with Alan Greenspan, he was talking about productivity gains were the driver of why we continue to have a thriving economy. That went on and on and on for years, and there was a lot of data to back that up. Could this be a next boom, you know, comparable to that type of impact?
So let me reference first a research study done about a year, maybe it was about a year or two ago, by ARK Invest. So Kathy Wood has a bunch of ETFs in the emerging technology space, and they do a big ideas study each year, and like, hey, what are the big ideas for this year? And if I jotted down some notes, so I'm going to refer back to this, because I saw that in 1997, the internet had pretty much no impact, no value in the stock market at that point.
Right.
By 2020, it had created an additional $13 trillion of value, what we deemed as the internet. Today, in 2020, AI and deep learning had about new companies and new value creation in the public markets, $2 trillion in value. And their projection is that by 2037, it would have $30 trillion in value. So new
Right.
creation of value like the internet. So you think about the internet impact, which has pretty much impacted all of our lives,
Sure.
brought a lot of productivity gains. She sees or their research department sees even more gains from AI and deep learning. And starting from that perspective, I think that that indeed, I believe the productivity gains, we're already seeing it right now.
Thanks for watching part 1 of how to leverage AI for productivity and profit with our special guest, Jason Wells. Look for part 2 to be released on April 20th. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.